This week on the show, we're going to be talking with Justin Cormack about NetBSD Rump Kernels. We're going to learn how to run them on other operating systems, what's planned for the future, and of course, a lot more. And as always, we're going to have answers to your viewer-submitted questions and all the news for the week. So keep it tuned right here, right now to BSD Now, your place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 64, Rump Kernels Revisited, recorded November 19th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us on this week's edition of BSD Now, where, of course, we have a lot of BSD-related stuff to talk about, including some release news that slipped by us right at the end of last week there.
Yep.
Sneaky. But we'll get to that in just a moment. So before we do, let's go right into our headlines. So EuroBSDCon this last year. You guys, of course, have heard us talk a lot about it, but now you don't have to take our word for it. You can go watch a lot of the videos about that. So it looks like we have some links here. Some of these may be temporary.
Right.
But
the videos are up on kind of a temporary place. Once they finish them all, they plan to put them all on YouTube. But currently, the videos from the big hall are missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like where I gave my talk and Jordan gave his.
And Theo gave his and a bunch of...
Kirk and Cusick. Yeah.
It's all the ones that everybody really wants to see. Not that the other ones aren't good as well. It's kind of interesting that, the other rooms were, I think, automated. But the room that actually had like two people at a desk recording the videos, those videos aren't ready yet for some reason. I'm not sure. But they are working on that still. But rather than make you wait, we have... a huge slew of videos, including the stuff from the tutorials, which they don't normally post.
Yeah, usually those you don't see.
Yep.
Well, grab these while you can, then. This is quite awesome. So it looks like they're all MP4 format.
Yep, they're all just easy to grab there. We have Arun Thomas's talk about BSD ARM kernel internals, Ted Unanx talking about developing software in a hostile environment. He also gave a talk about LibreSSL, but that was in the big hall.
Sure.
Martin Pouchot talking about taming the OpenBSD networking stack. Henning Brouwer talked about OpenPGPD. Claudio Jerker talked about FSCSI and iSCSID, the iSCSI initiator done the OpenBSD way.
Yep.
Paul Arufti talked about OpenBSD for the Octeon networking gear. Baptiste Dusson, one of the people behind PKG, talked about cross-building the FreeBSD ports tree. So, nice. ARM and MIPS and stuff that where the processors are kind of too slow to build all the entire ports tree on them. So instead, you build it on something else
something faster.
Yeah, in a special environment, and various ways they've come up with to speed that process up, rather than running it all inside QEMU, which is almost as slow as running it on the real hardware.
Sure.
Boris Astardev, gave a talk about SmartCom, which is a big company over in Europe. Their control plane software, which is a customized version of FreeBSD. Mikhail Dubel gave a talk about OpenStack and OpenContrail, which is OpenStack is a virtualization framework, and OpenContrail is a software-defined networking framework. And basically porting both of those so that you can actually run them on top of FreeBSD.
Cool.
And then
Martin Huseman and Georg Sonnenberg did toolchaining the Hydra, the ongoing quest for modern toolchains in NetBSD. We also have Taylor R. Campbell, the entropic principle about dev-urandom and NetBSD. And, of course, FreeBSD's very own Des, Dag Erling, did security sensitive and restrictive data. I caught that talk. That was a good talk, by the way, Dag.
It was near the end of the day, so I watched the first half of it, and then I had to get up and walk around, or I was going to fall asleep in my chair.
Yeah.
Not because it was actually really exciting. I really wanted to see it, so I'm glad I can watch the video.
Yep.
He works at a university, and they do medical research, and he had to have a way for people to be able to study the data without being able to access sensitive patient data, and also had to be able to prevent people from being able to copy data and take it away out of the system.
Yeah.
So he's got these really cool and interesting setup on how to actually secure sensitive data so people can work with it and work on it, but can't steal it.
Correct. Stuff doesn't leak out. Cool. So Peter Hanstein did building the network you need, and then with PF, of course.
That was actually a tutorial. So it's actually walking through doing it, not just to talk about it.
Sure. So Stefan Sperling did Subversion for FreeBSD developers. Peter Hanstein did Transition to OpenBSD, 5.6 specifically. And let's see, Ingo Suarez did Let's Make Manuals More Useful. Very cool.
Yes, that was about the Mandoc stuff and all the changes he's been doing to the OpenBSD man page system.
Nice. Okay.
And they had
lots
more too, right?
Say there's
Francois
a lot more of these
give improving Dragonfly BSD's performance for Postgres. Justin Cormack, who's our interview today, talked about running applications on the NetBSD Rump kernel. Pierre Ponchary gave a talk about EdgeBSD. We've interviewed him before, and he talked about now that they've been doing it for a year, what have they managed to accomplish? Peter Hessler talked about using routing domains or multiple routing tables in production networks. Sean Bruno gave a talk about using QEMU user mode on FreeBSD. Specifically, he's doing the cross-compiling stuff and getting MIPS binaries going. Chris Stapps Johnson gave a talk, Bugs ex ante. I forget what that one was actually about.
Well, that's why you can go watch it now.
They also talked about porting NetBSD to the Lattice Miko 32 open source CPU. Alexander Nosovov gave just-in-time code compilation for NetBSD. They're porting Valgrind to NetBSD and OpenBSD, parallel make for legacy code, and porting the DRM KMS graphics drivers to Dragonfly. Plus the whole list of talks that aren't quite available yet, but will be soon, including Jordan Hubbard's looking forward to the next 10 years of FreeBSD, although you might be able to catch a recording of that from MeetBSD.
Okay.
Theo's randomness, how Arc4 random has grown since 1998. We actually have a newer version of that he gave at a different conference later in the show. Chris Moore, I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Yeah, might have heard of him.
Did snapshots replication in boot environments. That was interesting. Kirk McCusick, an introduction to the implementation of ZFS. So actually how it works internally. John Mark Gurney, who we interviewed a couple of weeks ago, about optimizing Geli performance. So how he made the disk encryption of FreeBSD that much faster. Fuse and beyond, how to bridge different file systems together. NPF scripting with Lua. So that's the NPF is the new NetBSD firewall, and they have scripting built into it in Lua.
Cool.
Andrew Tannenbaum, who re-implementation of NetBSD based on a microkernel using based on Minix, and software segmentation offloading for FreeBSD. So many network cards support TCP segmentation offloading in the hardware, but for cards that don't, he's come up with a software solution. That'll be
cool.
And then, like I mentioned earlier, Ted Unangst has his Libre SSL talk, which is an update from the one we saw at BSDCan, talking about what's happened since BSDCan. Ed Mast talked about LLDB. So now that we've used Clang to compile everything, Clang has a debugger instead of using GDB. And once that gets ported, it might make debugging better as well. Then Philip Gunther gave secure lazy binding. And finally, Sean Webb did an introduction to the ASLR stuff for FreeBSD. So we hope to see those videos.
Of the messing talks, yeah. We need those sooner rather than later. But yeah, very cool. Well, before we go into the next headline for the week.
We threw all those videos at you. So,
Yeah.
Normally we kind of try to spread them out because we know you can't watch them all at once, but they're definitely worth checking out.
But if you want to go grab the files now.
People have been asking for quite a while, so.
Pod device so you can listen later or in the car. That'll keep you busy for at least a week or two. Cool. Well, before we go to the next headline, I just want to mention real quick, I had Dan getting a hold of me in chat here. Just wanted me to remind you guys that BSD cans call for papers will be open December 1st. So if you plan on speaking or doing a tutorial at BSD can, just to give you the heads up, get those papers written, and he'll start accepting them in the next couple weeks here.
Yes, and that kind of fits perfectly. Asia BSD Con's call for papers for March ends November 28th. So if
so you got a week from Friday.
To finish that. And if you miss it, or even if you don't, it's like, oh, look, I already have my paper done. I can just submit it the following Monday for BSD Can.
Yep, that's right. That's right. So anyway, that's good to know. So try and, if you're planning on going to the conference or speaking, doing a tutorial, whatever, do go ahead and try and get that submitted to them. Okay, next up in the headlines, OpenBSD adopts SIP hash.
Yes.
So looks like some more crypto has found its way into OpenBSD's base system. Very cool. This time specifically, though, it's SIP hash, which is a family of pseudo-random functions that's resistant to hash bucket flooding attacks while still providing good performance. So it looks like they did an initial import, and they've had some clever early usage. A few developers have agreed it looks like it could be better to use in a lot of other places. So it'll now be used in the file system, but the plan is to utilize it to protect all kernel hash functions down the road. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, this is more DJB or Dan Bernstein, who wrote Qmail and a lot of this crypto stuff that everybody seems to be in love with. And it's even more Dan in your
in your OpenBSD. Yeah. Cool.
But so it looks interesting. They're throwing it all over the place.
Well, some of his other work in OpenBSD include like the Cha-Cha-20, Poly 1305 stream ciphers, and then we have the Curve 25519 KEX,
which is a key exchange. Yep. And then
and Cha-Cha-20
is also used in the RNG in place of the old ARC4 random, which Theo actually talks about in his talk. And the ED25519 is also used in Signify, in addition to what we already mentioned, it used in SSH for the new key type.
Well, very cool. Very cool. So that's neat to see happening in OpenBSD.
You forget that there's a hashing algorithm in your file system just for putting stuff in buckets.
Definitely. But hey, this is all important stuff, and it's good to see that there's some eyeballs on this. Okay, well, speaking of some release news that I kind of teased at the beginning of the show, of course, FreeBSD 10.1 landed this last week, and of course, it was right after we finished the new episode last week. I think, what was it? They announced it Friday night, and that kind of bummed me out, too, because I was like, I'm not announcing PCBSD on the weekend. I'll wait till Monday. Yep. No good comes of a release for us on Saturday for Friday night. But anyway, so yeah, the FreeBSD release is out of the 10.x branch. So, of course, this is their first .1. A lot of cool stuff in this one. A lot of people have already switched to it and are running it and enjoying it.
In particular, it's just a stable release. So, you're not expecting too much in the way of new features, but actually got quite a bit in the way of new features anyway. But the best part is that an upgrade from 10.0 to 10.1 is fairly smooth. Other than there was a little hiccup with FreeBSD update, but that was just not letting you start. It wasn't like it was breaking your system during the upgrade. But I think that's been resolved, right?
I believe it has been. Yeah, we've seen some issues with FreeBSD update, ours too, where it's like, did the update, but then you reboot and it like didn't copy the kernel over or something. It's like, it's still the old kernel. So. Anyway, something else to dig into.
The nice thing with 10.0 to 10.1 is that shouldn't make the system unbootable, where it could cause quite a mess with going from 9 to 10 doing that.
Correct. Well, in this case, it hadn't even done anything to world. It was just the first stage, copying the kernel over.
And it just hadn't
silently didn't do it. So, okay,
but whatever. Some highlights of what you get on 10.1 are the new console driver, VT, which means you can get accelerated video on your Intel and ATI video cards or AMD video cards.
TJ has a note here that can even be used on a PlayStation 3. Nice. Very cool. I know we turned that on by default for PCBSD because it just works and it's pretty nice.
Beehive got lots of updates, including being able to run 32-bit FreeBSD, being able to boot more versions of OpenBSD, fixing lots of problems with running different versions of Linux, being able to boot root on ZFS inside of Beehive.
Nice.
Lots and lots and lots of other things too. So Beehive on 10.1 is significantly better than it was in 10.0. And it means you don't have to run head anymore to get a nice version of Beehive. They also added SMP support for ARMv6. So if you have one of those little ARM devices that has more than one CPU, you can actually take advantage of that now. So I think like the
fantastic.
Banana Pi and a couple other devices have multiple cores, and you can take advantage of that now. Also, finally, we have support for UEFI booting. Currently, it's only for AMD 64, but that's what most people are running. And currently, you can only boot UFS with it, but that's still a work in progress. And Chris will talk about his solution for that a little bit later.
Wow. Yes, we'll talk about that in a moment.
The other thing that is mostly Chris's fault, probably, is support for caching Geli passwords is built in now. So when you, specifically, if you have an encrypted ZFS array and you have 8 disks, before in 10.0, when you're booted, you had to type the password 8 times.
Sure.
Now, if you type it the first time and then the second time, it tries the password from last time. If it doesn't work, it doesn't count against your 3 strikes. But
just silently yes, or
it just asks again.
Now.
But so if you use a different password for each disk, it'll still be the same. But if you use the same password for all your disks, then you will only have to type it once instead of 8 times.
Very handy. Yeah, that'll save some time. Especially, like you said, if you have 8 disks, that can get a little tedious.
Exactly. And also,
looks like they updated a lot of their third-party software too, like OpenSSH, OpenSSL, Unbound, of course. And drivers have gotten updates.
And support for UDP Lite. I forget what the special about that, but it was important for something. And then they have the new auto mounting tool, AutoFS. We're going to talk about that soon because most people don't realize how important that is. But it basically allows you to, it replaces the old AMD or auto mount daemon and allows you to basically get a list of file systems from LDAP or directory services or something and be able to have access to file servers all over like a campus, like a company or a university or something, but not mount them until you're using them and unmount them when you're not using them. But it's all transparent. So the directories all appear there, and then just as you use them, it will go out, connect to the server, access it, and then unmount when you're not using it anymore. And then they also added the startup script for SSHD will now generate an ED25519 host key if you don't already have one. So specifically, if you're upgrading from 10 to 10.1, it'll resolve the problem where you would get this error message coming up every hour or whenever it rotates the keys or whatever, saying, hey, I couldn't find an ED25519 key because normally the algorithm or the part of the startup script that decides to generate the keys doesn't do that if your keys already exist. So now it's got a smarter check in it where it'll be like, oh, well, the regular keys exist, but this new kind of key doesn't exist, so it generates it now. Although that means that you might get a new key warning when you go connect to a server saying, hey, the server has a different key. It's not the wrong key, it's just a different algorithm. So you might want to watch out for that.
Okay. Looks like they updated OpenSSH to version 6.6 P1.
Yes, that brings a couple of extra fun things. They upgraded Netcat, which wasn't a big deal, but I had to patch the man page, and since Netcat in FreeBSD comes from OpenBSD, I had got that committed to OpenBSD, and I had to wait for it to be slurped up. So my man page, my one-line man page fix is now in Netcat in FreeBSD.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, SendMail got a bump to 8.14.9.
And,
the Unbound caching resolver and LDNS have both been updated to version 1.4.22. Let's see, OpenPAM got an update. OpenSSL, of course, after all the recent stuff, this is a good idea. 1.01J.
And the version of package that's built in is updated as well.
That's 1.3.8 now, which I guess 1.4 is just around the corner. I'm supposed to throw that into our Edge repo here soon. Let people start playing with it. But lots of good stuff.
And that's just the highlights. There's obviously lots of new drivers and hardware support. Obviously fixes for every security patch that's come out since 10.0.
Sure.
There's a new sysctl, kern.panic reboot wait time. You can control how long you want the machine to sit there at the panic screen before it automatically reboots. Whether you want that to be, 30 seconds or like an hour or something. Long enough that if you're sitting at the machine, you can read what the panic was and decide to cancel the automatic reboot.
Yeah, if you're going to do it or not.
But short enough that if you're not there, your machine will restart and get back to work instead of sitting there panicked. So that's very nice.
Cool.
There's information in there about how to use VT and stuff. Fix some problems with the USB stack. Updated the support AMD temp kernel module so it can detect the temperature sensors on newer AMD processors.
Nice.
They fixed a bug that inhibited the proper functioning of the CPU frequency scaling on Intel processors with Turbo Boost. Because of the way it worked, it could wrongly detect the Turbo Boost and then throttle your CPU when you didn't want it to. So they fixed that bug so that you can have better control over how you want, on a server, you probably want Turbo Boost enabled, or even on your laptop. It seems to not make sense that when you want to overclock your laptop, but certain types of tasks running in Turbo Boost at, the much higher clock frequency for a shorter amount of time while using more power will in total use less power than running at a slower clock speed to do that work over more seconds. So it can actually extend your battery life by using more power at once to finish the job and then go back to sleep instead of. So that's
sitting there and drawing it out.
So that's a big one for servers and laptops.
Nice. Okay.
They also fix bugs where jails were setting the correct IPv4 source address when you have raw sockets happening and stuff. And they also did the virtual memory subsystem has updated to implement FastPath for the page fault handler, which in general will just make everything faster. Or anything having to do with memory anyway. Plus,
very nice.
Newer support for Hyper-V. So it's all available as loadable modules now. They're not in the generic kernel, but you can load them now.
Just KLD load them at boot.
Obviously, Beehive has lots of new stuff, including the soft power off. So if you just do a sig term on Beehive, instead of just ending, it will simulate you having pressed the power button and shut down your VM gracefully. And lots and lots of other stuff in here, including the new VirtIO random device to pass the real random into the virtual machine, which is very important if you're doing certain types of jobs in your virtual machine. Like we said, more support for ARM, including the WAN board and Chromebook and lots of other devices.
Nice.
The BSD menu that everybody's used to for FreeBSD now has menu options to allow you to pick different kernels. It defaults to kernel and kernel.old, which are the two that might exist by default. But by modifying the variable in your loader.conf, you can provide your own list of kernels. So
it's almost a boot environment.
Yeah.
So close. Almost.
Well, it even works with UFS, though. It just lets you.
True. This is true.
It's much easier way than having to drop to the prompt and load a different kernel.
Figure out
if
the
you
command,
are the type of person that updates your system, twice a day or something.
Very cool.
And lots of other interesting stuff, including all the bits for making EFI work. And like we mentioned, lots of new drivers and all the fun stuff. Including
so there's a pretty extensive doc here.
They renamed some of the stuff for the Intel 10 gigabit NIC. So if you've been tuning that, you might have to watch for the change there.
I know some of the VirtIO drivers got support for unmapped I/O. That's a
which
good
is
one.
Should make the disks much faster. And obviously, the iSCSI initiator got many updates and support for redirect handling and lots of other stuff that'll definitely improve your iSCSI.
Cool.
Which is important for a lot of things. Yeah, huge list of changes for iSCSI here. Also, the whole Geom layer got support for direct I/O dispatch or I/O direct dispatch. So this should improve disk performance, especially under load, on everything. So that should be quite a big improvement to finally have that in 10.1. So expect much improved disk performance on your new 10.1 servers when you upgrade.
So basically, you need to upgrade now if you want these things.
And importantly, the new ZVol property, vol mode, which allows you to specify when I create a ZFS ZVol, do I want it to be a regular Geom device where I can partition it on the host, or do I want it to be a plain block device that the host doesn't touch because I'm going to use it in a virtual machine and I don't want the host trying to use it at the same time and
muck
mucking
around
with it.
Yeah.
And also, so the default is Geom, but you can also set it to dev, which forces the operating system to leave it alone, or to none, and the operating system won't even see it, which is very useful if you're doing
nice.
ZFS replication on the backup machine. You can have all the zvols just not be functional, so that they don't get touched
So
by
the host system doesn't, try and mangle
or
anything.
that in a replicated pairs type setup, it's not, you can have zvols with the same name that aren't going to conflict and so on.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yes.
Nice.
And lots more useful stuff, including GStat now has the -O option to display the other column, which will count operations like the flush operation and other stuff that normally doesn't fit under the regular read, write, or delete operations.
Okay.
So you can see what other commands might be going to your disks.
Cool.
And tons and tons of other stuff. The links in the show notes, you can read it yourself.
Okay. Well, related to this, I guess I'll get into this now, the PCBSD updates for 10.1. So, of course, we released a new PCBSD 10.1 on Monday, so following FreeBSD 10.1. And, of course, it incorporates all the FreeBSD changes because it is FreeBSD under the hood. But in addition to that, we have some specific bits that are new. First of all, UEFI support, of course, we've added that as well. But since we're doing UEFI through Grub, we can now do UEFI on ZFS for root. So if you'd like to do that, that is now enabled. And in addition, we can do UEFI and mixtures of like Jelly full disk encryption on ZFS, etc. And it all works with the VT console driver now, and just it's pretty stinking nice. I've been pretty pleased how that worked. So the only thing the UEFI doesn't do is secure boot at the moment. So if you do have secure boot, just turn that off. But you should be able to boot on a pure UEFI system now. And we also now ship VirtualBox disk images of 10.1, both 3 formats. We have VirtualBox, VMware, and then RAW disk images. We have a CD-sized installer with a text command line only version of TrueOS that'll let you, do a quick server deployment. If, in particular, where this is handy is if, say, you want a FreeBSD system, but you want to do UEFI with ZFS on root and have it jelly encrypted
and have boot environments with the menu.
Boot environments.
And the nice thing is,
with the menu.
You said it's a CD-size install, so you don't have to download the whole 4 gigs of
correct
of PCBSD to do it.
It's like 600 megs, and you just download that, pop it on a CD or a small USB stick, and then you can get all these cool new features we have for the boot, and that'll be available. Let's see here. Oh, Linux Compat, we got an update to that, so we're at CentOS 6.6 in PCBSD by default. Yeah, that was good. We got that in pretty close to the end there, but it was a welcome update. Lumina has also been updated to 0.7.1, so people wanting to try the new desktop environment are welcome to do so in 10.1. We also have a new browser-based application. We call it PC SoftWeb, is just the command line name that we use, but that lets you browse the new HTML5 App Cafe web interface that you can use remotely. So if you want to put a system somewhere where it's maybe headless and you don't have access to it, you can now control jails and packages and create jails, install packages, upgrade packages, all that over your phone or remote web browser.
That is useful.
That is very useful, very cool, and that's the thing we're going to be trying to merge here into FreeNAS 10 here soon.
Nice.
So we're going to try and have a unified application experience across TrueOS, PCBSD, and FreeNAS, and who knows where else it'll show up in the future. Let's see here. We got rid of the SSD option from the installer because it's optimized now by default for SSDs. It does all that in the background. Jelly full disk encryption has been added back into the graphical and text installers, and that's our preferred method of encryption now. The installers will do all the setup for that. You just give it your password and away it goes. Oh, and a cool thing is, right before release, we did manage to get Jelly full disk encryption working with ZFS with Mirror and RAID Z setups as well.
Nice.
So the installer will handle that now properly, and Grub will prompt for the passwords, and away you go. Let's see here. We added some utilities to the emergency mode, like a fix grub option, which say you accidentally blow away your bootloader, maybe you're dual booting and something else, trampled it, you can now quickly restamp.
Nice. That's definitely useful because, oftentimes when you install an OS, when you install the second one, it likes to trample all over the bootloader.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this fixes that, and it does make it a lot easier because some of the steps are like you have to import the Z pool, then chroot into it, mount some stuff, and then
Yep.
run grub install, right? So this just handles that all automatically for you.
Nice.
So makes it real handy. We also added a host AP mode to our wireless utility. So now if you have a system with a wireless device, you can click on that and share it, and make your Wi-Fi accessible. So
Right.
like
So,
if I'm at the hotel room,
and your laptop has a wired connection, but you want to get your phone
mhm,
on or whatever, right?
yeah, you can share it and make an instant hotspot. So
Awesome.
that is pretty cool. We added some stuff to Life Preserver for being able to start replications automatically via the GUI. I'm just looking through all the notes here. There's just a lot of little stuff like that. Ooh, one thing we didn't even get in the notes because it went in so late was ZFS auto tuning now. So
Yes.
when you do your installation, it'll tune your arc size based on your RAM. So you won't run into the case where you have 4 gigs of memory and then you boot up the system and run for a bit and then go try to fire up a 2 gigabyte VM or something. It's like, I'm out of memory, and start swapping and bad stuff happens. So that'll now be tuned properly out of box. So you don't have to change that unless you really want to
Yeah,
for some reason.
because the default for ZFS is like 95% of your RAM, and in
Way
an
too.
interactive system, that's probably not the right amount.
Yeah, that's a lot. That is a
It makes
lot.
perfect sense for a free NAS. It doesn't make
Mhm.
sense for your laptop.
Yeah, and even for a lot of servers
Yeah,
too. You run a database or something, it's like, oh, I
exactly.
need RAM, and to
And
have your cache using everything is
yeah,
not so good.
the
So,
default is that's probably not a good default, honestly. But
and that'll be tuned on TrueOS as well. So
cool.
if you install the server, your arc size will be smaller out of the box. And I think I'm trying to think what the settings are. If it's 1 gig of memory, it's a 128 megs of arc, and 2 gigs, 256. 4 gigs, 512, and then so forth and so on. So it has some sane defaults to try and not
Right,
blow up and
because
use
just
all of your RAM.
8% doesn't make sense because you want it to be,
Hmm.
less of a percent when you only have a small amount of RAM, and it can be more
Sure.
of a percent when you have lots of RAM and so on.
So that's why we did it that way.
Cool.
And of course, you can always tune that. It's in
Yep.
bootloader.conf. If you decide you want to use more cache, you can do that. That's a feature we're going to add for 10.1.1 for our first quarterly update. We'll add it to the GUI so you can just go in and change your cache size,
Awesome.
very easily. So yeah, that is very cool. Yeah, those are some of the main highlights. There's a lot of stuff that went into this, and of course, the latest versions of GNOME, Firefox, KDE, etc. So some awesome stuff there. We just ported over a Telegraph graphical utility. So if you use Telegraph messaging, you can now do that on your desktop.
Nice.
It's pretty cool. And KDE Connect. I don't know if I mentioned that before in a
Only
previous
to
episode, but
me,
lets
but
you
I don't
tether.
know if you mentioned it everywhere.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool little utility. If you use KDE, you can basically connect your Android device to your KDE system, and then when you click like share or you want to send like say a web link or something, you can say send it to my desktop, and boom, it just shows up in your web browser. You can share files back and forth over Wi-Fi. You can use it as a touchscreen for your KDE desktop, and you can use it to control like multimedia. And the cool thing I like though is when I get an SMS, my phone's usually in my pocket, like it pops up on my screen. I don't even have to
There
pull
you
my phone
go.
out to see what people are sending me, and it'll flash up and say your phone's ringing. Here's who's calling, and I can see all that on my screen since I'm sitting here for 8 hours a day.
Exactly.
It's actually quite handy.
If I'm in the middle of writing some code and I hear my phone text message go off,
Yeah,
I'm like, right, I'll remember to look at that in a minute, and then I don't.
yeah, yep. But it's pretty cool. Oh, you get a shared clipboard too,
Oh,
so you
nice.
can copy and paste from your desktop to your phone and vice versa.
But
So
I
that
definitely like
again,
the idea of controlling my media center with it too. Because
it is very
yeah,
cool. So 10.1's a fun update. Lots of good new stuff in there. So we encourage all users of FreeBSD and PCBSD, of course, to start getting upgraded here.
awesome.
Okay, sorry, we took a long time talking about
Well,
10.1
it
stuff.
was,
There's a lot.
the culmination of, 11 months of work by
Yeah, there was a
everybody.
lot there. A lot
Yeah.
there. But okay, we'll try and get into some other headlines now.
Oh, because I guess the other feature that would technically be there is the text installer for FreeBSD now has the option to mirror or encrypt your swap partitions when
Yeah.
you're installing the root on ZFS from the menu thing. I wrote that at
So is that
BSD Camp.
automatic, or do you have to specify?
In the menu, when you're setting up how you want to set up your ZFS pool, there's just
Mhm.
yes, no boxes for encrypt my swap and mirror my swap.
Okay. So for those who are curious, the way we've done that is swap's encrypted by default.
Oh,
So you
nice.
don't even have to select it. We just assume we're going to encrypt that. Why not? And then mirroring, if you do set up a Z pool that's got mirror RAID Z disks, it does set up the geom mirror of your swap automatically as well.
Cool.
So there's no real setting anywhere. It just does it. And when you boot your system, you go, oh, I have a swap mirror
Nice.
device, and that's mirrored across, my 5 disks or however many you threw in the pool.
Awesome.
So anyway, that's how we do that as well. Okay, well, next up, Arc for Random. Moving on, back to OpenBSD.
Yes.
So
this is
Arc for Random.
this is the talk
go ahead.
that Theo gave at EuroBSDCon, although slightly updated, I think. And he's giving this at Hackfest, which was in Quebec. I think this last weekend or very recently, anyway. And so, since the video of that from EuroBSDCon is not available yet, you can watch it over here.
Sure. But the presentations, of course, mainly about OpenBSD's Arc for Random function, outlines the overall poor state of randomization in the 90s and how it has evolved in OpenBSD over the time since then. It begins with some interesting history on OpenBSD, how it became a security-focused OS in 1996 when their syslog-D got broken into, and suddenly they became, of course, very interested in their security.
Yep.
The talk touches on how some low-level changes can, of course, shake up the software ecosystem and third-party packages that everyone uses. And he has a little bit of funny history in it as well, in the name of the function, being called Arc for Random despite
The
not
fact
using RC4 anymore.
Yeah, now it's not based on RC4.
Oh, well,
But,
hey,
it's what all the programs use, and, just renaming it didn't make a lot of sense. Plus,
no
the way
reason to.
changing it this way meant that every program that already supported Arc4 Random now uses the better algorithm without having to be patched.
That's pretty cool. So, of course, it's a very detailed and informative presentation, and we have a link here to the slides as well.
Yep.
So if you'd like to see what was on the
The
screen.
video includes the slides, so they're
Okay, well, that's perfect.
the nice part there is when it's timed with the video. So
With the audio,
you see the slide he was showing while he's talking about it.
While he's talking about it. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So, really cool pull quote from the beginning of this. And this is Theo, of course. We consider ourselves a community of probably rather strange people who work on software specifically for the purpose of trying to make it better. We take a whole systems approach, trying to change everything in the ecosystem that's under our control, trying to see if we can make it better. We gain a lot of strength by being able to throw backwards compatibility out the window. So that means we're able to do research and in the minute decide. And the minute that we decide something isn't right, we'll design an alternative for it and push it in. And if it ends up breaking somebody's machine from the previous stage to the next stage, that's fine because we'll all end up in a happier place. Yep. That's very aggressive with the upgrades there. And of course,
but that's the point of OpenBSD.
That's the point. Yeah. So that's cool. And that's how they push their innovation along.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Somebody has to do it that way.
More power to you guys.
Right?
Yeah, somebody's got to do it that way. More power to you guys. That's really cool. Okay, so that wraps up our headlines for the week. Yep. Of course, we want to mention one of the sponsors at this time. So that's going to be IX Systems first this week. Yep. And of course, ixsystems.com/BSD Now is the URL where you can go there and fill out the form, download the free guide on what to know when you purchase a server from open source, things to know about your vendor and what to ask, etc.
Yep.
And they have a YouTube video, it looks like, this week,
yes,
Alan.
They also
have something to show on the screen there?
An overview of the changes that are in FreeNAS 9.3, which is out in beta, and they're hoping people will try that out. They've taken great pains this time to make sure that you'll be able to upgrade from the beta to the release when it's out later on, so that way people... If you're doing a new install, you might as well start with 9.3 beta, try out the new stuff, and then upgrade to release as it goes along. So, yes.
I saw something they were guaranteeing it would be upgradable from beta to RC to release or whatever.
Yes.
So that's very cool. So yeah, you definitely want to start with 9.3 beta if you're going to be rolling a new box. But if you have another system, it might be time to upgrade and try it out. There's a lot of cool new features.
Hoping that people will do that because they want to make sure that the release is perfect when it does come out. And for that, they need people to try it on different hardware and all the different things. You can be pretty sure it'll work flawlessly on the true NAS, but they don't have the little box of the pile of random parts you cobble together to make your free NAS.
Sure.
So if you could try it on that'd be great.
Yeah. They need to know specific edge cases, like on this NIC, like we need to look at something here, or whatever.
Or when I try to do this, it makes it go sideways and so on.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, IX Systems, being corporate sponsor of both the PCBSD project and FreeNAS, and just kind of good citizens overall in the BSD community. These guys know they're open source.
They do.
and they can build you a hardware solution to work with that open source, whatever your particular variety may be.
Yep.
So, and of course, they build everything from the small FreeNAS minis that I have sitting here underneath my desk that I do all my backups to.
I guess we talked a little bit about the video they had from MeetBSD last week. If you haven't seen that, you should definitely go check out. Various people from the BSD community ripping random hard drives out of a TrueNAS and destroying them with a hammer to prove that your TrueNAS will keep working even if you pull hard drives out while it's running.
The best part was Kirk McCusick destroying.
He destroys the hard drive, and then he's like, "I've always wanted to do that."
That's right. That's right.
When you write the file system for a living, I'm sure there are many times when you would love to just smash a hard drive with a hammer.
Yeah. Well, he got his chance, and it was filmed, so you can enjoy it too if you weren't able to make it out to MeetBSD last couple weeks. But again, that URL, ixsystems.com/BSD Now, and let them know that we sent you when you're talking to these guys. We would appreciate that.
Yep.
Today we're joined by Justin Cormack of NetBSD. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. The first question we always ask people is how do they first hear about and get into BSD?
Well, I came across Unix back, I was at MIT and I went into a room and it was full of these rows and rows and rows of terminals with strange 3-button mice and X windows back in the early 90s, and I thought this was an interesting thing. So I was a Unix user since then and became a sysadmin, did a lot of work with Solaris and Linux, and I started coming across NetBSD at FOSDEM in Europe, which happens every year, and I've been for a long time. And I started going to the NetBSD talks, and I didn't really have a use particularly for NetBSD at the time, but it was interesting, and I was particularly interested in their approach to testing, and because I'd really thought about testing operating systems, and they seemed to take that seriously, so I kind of got really interested in that, and then sort of early last year, because I work on Lua and among other things, and there was a mailing list from someone saying, wouldn't it be interesting if we could run Lua directly on Xen without an operating system? Yeah, and there's a few projects doing that. There's Erlang on Xen project and a couple of other ones, Mirage. And so I thought we could do that. And I thought, I'd been to a talk about Rump Kernel, NetBSD Rump Kernel at FOSDEM earlier in the year, and I thought, well, we could use that to kind of do the thing together. So I started talking about the possibility of this, and it turned out to be relatively straightforward. First of all, we got the NetBSD Rump kernel. We got a hypercall driver for Xen, which turns out to have its own little mini-OS built in, which actually makes it quite easy to write code to run directly on Xen. I discovered that's why people had chosen that as a target. And then the next thing we had to do was actually get Lua running. So that actually involved compiling. We need a libc because Lua, although Lua doesn't need much operating system support, but it obviously needs a libc to compile. So we cross-compiled the NetBSD libc to run on the Xen stub with a bit of hacking to remove the actual system call traps and replace them just with Rump kernel calls. At which point, got Lua running, which was really nice, and we could run my test suite that I had for Rump kernel I'd fixed up before that to run that, and it would pass all the NetBSD tests as if it was running on NetBSD. And so I kind of got quite involved in doing this, and also in porting Rump kernel to other BSDs, other architectures, MIPS and PowerPC, and FreeBSD and OpenBSD. And somewhere along there, people suddenly started hassling me, saying you should become a NetBSD developer. It'd be easier to get this stuff upstream and so on. So I became one early this year.
Mhm.
And started committing stuff and breaking the build and
Tradition.
tradition. Yeah, it's an important thing. You have to do it once. There's a feeling of paranoia when you think you're going to, and then the relief. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time working on automated builds for testing NetBSD via the Rump kernel. So I run about continuous integration tests every hour on different platforms, cross builds, which again the Rump kernel makes that very quick and easy compared to building the whole user space and kernel and booting into it. You can basically do all your tests in user space without booting, so you can do tests in about 10-15 minutes from a build from scratch, unless for incremental.
For users that maybe didn't see the previous interview,
Yes,
could you give us a quick recap of what Rump kernel is?
So the Rump kernel is basically where you take just the drivers out of NetBSD, the drivers in the sort of broad sense of everything from a file system driver to the network stack, and you take that and you put a little virtualization, what's effectively a virtualization layer in front of it, which basically has a minimum amount that you need to run it, and you run those drivers somewhere else. So like in user space is one case, or under Zen, or on bare metal hardware, and so you can take a file on your FreeBSD system, say, and run the NetBSD file system drivers on that as a block device, and just run that in user space. You can sit there, you can run it in GDB, you can modify it, see what happens, without actually having to use that on a live system. And you can modify it and run it in user space. And the layer of actual glue code is very simple, because the Rump kernel is very much a rump. It's not a whole kernel. It doesn't have memory allocation or processes or any of the kind of hard things that operating systems do. It borrows those from another environment. So you can borrow them from the user space environment in FreeBSD, say. And so FreeBSD handles processes and memory and that kind of thing. And you're just left with these drivers. But that's actually quite a lot of stuff, and it's enough that when you stick libc on top of it, you've got most of a POSIX user space with a few bits of glue back to the host, so you can actually compile real applications and run them on this sort of stub. And so effectively you end up with a very lightweight user space virtual machine that you can run code in.
Right.
That's effectively, you can run NetBSD code pretty much anywhere. But we talked to Linux people today who are at the conference, and they're really interested in using these NetBSD drivers in their microkernel framework, so that they would run individual drivers in separate processes for each of the things they want. So they don't have to write their own USB stack. They can borrow the NetBSD one, run it in a process, sit it there, talk to the hardware in a safe, mediated way at the bottom end. They haven't got an IPv6 stack at the moment. They don't really want to write one. You can just take the NetBSD IPv6 stack, use it unmodified in somewhere else, and run code. And a lot of people are interested in networking and user space, because you save a lot of context switches. There's a lot of interesting things you can do.
It makes development much easier because you're not having to rebuild the whole kernel and reboot and everything just to start running this newer code.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things that we did was write, at the moment it only runs on Linux, but we're having to port that to FreeBSD as well, is a user space PCI layer that can run NetBSD's PCI drivers in user space on Linux. So you can sit there writing a driver for a wireless card, for example, and test it out in user space. And if your driver goes horribly wrong and breaks it, you can just restart it, reset the PCI device, carry on. And that's a much more friendly device development environment than
hacking on the kernel that you're trying to run on.
Yes. And when it breaks, it goes away and you have to start again. I mean, virtual machines make that a bit easier, but not but this is much easier.
Yes.
And so that's been another thing that's been really, PCI devices and user space really help driver development, and driver development and testing were the two core use cases for the Rump kernel.
Right.
But we're just really experimenting with what else you can do. And,
So how's the progress on porting it to FreeBSD?
well, the NetBSD drivers run on FreeBSD.
Right.
Pretty much all the code is in the continuous integration framework. Some of the user space stuff I've had a few troubles with. FreeBSD's GCC.
It's particularly old.
Yeah, it is. I think it's mainly because I think it's got some hacks in it as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But the core Rump kernel stuff is fine, runs with Clang, it's not a problem, but some of the user space stuff, it works, but it's the build process is a bit annoying. I need to spend some more time.
How would somebody actually go about running a Rump kernel on FreeBSD? So
well, there's a
package, or?
there's a repository on if you go to github.com/rumpkernel, everything's there. There's a package called Build Rump that's designed for building Rump, not on NetBSD, because NetBSD has built it.
Right.
But if you want to build it on anything else, Build Rump is there, and that will just work fine. You just do buildrump.sh, and wait a bit, downloads some NetBSD source code and builds it, and it's quite quick. Mm-hmm. That'll just work. Some of the user space stuff is in separate repositories there, and might need a little bit more tweaking, but we're always on #Rump kernel on Freenode, and and there's a mailing list, and we're happy to help.
Cool.
And FreeBSD is one of the things that we expect to support as well as NetBSD, and it'd be nice. I use FreeBSD a bit. I once bought some drivers from FreeBSD to NetBSD as well, so that sort of thing. So
Cool. What are your plans for moving forward? What's next?
I've got a few pet projects on it. Part of it's just more cleaning up and tidying up build processes. I never realised that I'd spend so much time on build processes, but they're annoying. But once you fix them, they tend to work, which is good. So cleaning up the user space application stuff to build in a nicer way. I've got a evil plan to install the Rump kernel on bare metal on a ARM microcontroller, because I think it's an interesting case of a microcontroller is too small to run a full operating system, but the Rump kernels the drivers are cut down, and you can probably squeeze them on. So that's one of my plans. So I think that'd be quite fun. I've got a little board with an Ethernet card that would be nice to drive with NetBSD, for making a smaller toaster. And working with the Minix guys really want this stuff because they want drivers, so I'm going to work with them on that in the next few weeks. Generally, trying to get in. So there's some people who are really interested in user space networking. I need to do some performance testing on 10 gig Ethernet, because a lot of people have asked, what's the performance of user space networking like? And the answer is, I've got a network card set up, but I haven't had time to make some decent tests yet. And writing good benchmarks is hard.
Yes,
I don't want
10 gig Ethernet isn't that ubiquitous yet to be able to, for most developers, to actually have access to the hardware to test with it.
It's getting better.
Yes.
It's getting better. They're cheaper now than they were, and it's a more interesting test than gigabit Ethernet, which pretty much everything should be able to saturate gigabit. So 10 gigs a more useful test, and it's what the interesting user space networking people are using.
Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I don't think so. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yes,
thanks for doing your program. I enjoy it every week.
Thank you.
Okay, now it's time to do our weekly roundup. But before we do that, of course, we want to mention the other sponsor on the show this week, which is Tarsnap. in that URL, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Go there, sign up. You need to be getting your backups rolling, especially with all these upgrades going on. Like, there's never a better time to get your backups done than right before you go ahead and do an upgrade, especially with new kernels and world and all that.
Well, and just it's interesting the number of times I've talked to various FreeBSD developers, and they always have a story of how they wrote this awesome code and then lost it. It's like, you guys need to use Tarsnap.
Yeah, don't be that guy.
Exactly.
Get your stuff backed up. Come on, guys.
Don't lose
2014.
anything ever.
We have lots of bandwidth. We can we can upload and do backups, and it's all fully encrypted. So there's no reason not to, guys.
Like,
and
literally,
it's dirt cheap.
A gigabyte of code is a lot of code, right?
Yes.
And it only costs 25 cents. If you can't spare the fraction of a quarter that it'll cost to back up all of your code all of the time, then come on.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, there's no reason not to. Yeah. So you might as well do it Tarsnap. They got clients for just about everything. Yep. So you want to check that out. And again, tarsnap.com/BSD Now is that URL. Do let them know that we sent you. Yep. We would appreciate that. Okay, so first up, in the news roundup, we have some big news.
Yes, this has been, I think,
big dollar amount.
Biggest news I've seen all week.
Yeah, the FreeBSD Foundation's biggest donation ever. So they have a new blog post about the largest donation they've ever gotten. Mm-hmm. So the donation comes from the CEO of WhatsApp, and it comes to a whopping $1 million in a single donation. So I think they made their amount they were looking for.
They were hoping to hit $1 million this year, and they were at like 937,000, something like that. And then, boom, double that.
Wow. Yeah. So they did really good this year, and I'm excited to see some of the projects that this is going to fund in the upcoming years.
Yes.
You know, some of the new code that'll go in, new features, things.
But also it'll go for other things. You know, obviously hardware for the cluster and so on, but also travel grants to send people to conferences. I think it'd be great to actually see more BSD people going to the Linux conferences and explaining to them how, hey, better stuff over here.
Why you want to use BSD and why this may be a good alternative for you. So that's fantastic. That money is going to go to a lot of good use. And for my part, thank you to the CEO of WhatsApp. That's incredible.
The other thing is he actually, on Facebook, I think it was, did a post explaining why he did it. And, you know, it's actually a very interesting story. But, you know,
it is.
He was a poor student and didn't have much in the way of prospects. But he was learning FreeBSD in his spare time, and that led to getting a job at Yahoo and doing FreeBSD full time and interesting stuff. And then he went on to found WhatsApp and kept using FreeBSD. And he's very grateful to FreeBSD because it basically gave him what he needed to bootstrap himself. From being a poor immigrant student to being a billionaire.
Yeah. A position where he could donate $1 million, and that's incredible. And of course, so we want to mention the FreeBSD Foundation is a 501c3.
Yes.
So it must show that it has the support of the general public, just not just a small number of large donors. So that's why we do try and mention that individual donations are very important, and just as important as the large ones in some cases.
While the foundation likes getting big donations, it's obviously very nice. What they actually prefer are recurring donations. Because if they get subscriptions where they know that this amount of money is going to be coming in going forward, it makes it much easier for them to plan and budget. There's actually, I think, they did a talk about that. I guess that was in the Dev Summit, wasn't it? Justin's talk about the foundation. So I guess there's no video of that one. But so they talk about how, the IRS has a test where they check and, if all the money the foundation gets is coming from, Google and WhatsApp, then obviously the foundation would lose its charity status because it would technically be a trade group of those companies rather than a foundation for the good of everybody. And really, FreeBSD is benefiting everybody, so we need to keep the foundation going. Even just small donations, even just $5,
even just $5.
They've obviously this year they will meet their goal for the record number of total donation dollar amount, but they would love to hit a record for the number of unique donors. Getting more people that donated and getting that number to be bigger is a great goal. So even if it's just $5, donate it and get your name on the list. Or,
Yes.
if you have a favorite FreeBSD developer or someone that helped you on a mailing list or anything like that, you can donate $5. And when you go to donate on the FreeBSD Foundation site, you can attribute it to someone. You can say, this donation is on behalf of someone else or whatever.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I like their new site, by the way, too. I don't know if we'd mentioned that in the
yes,
past.
they got a nice new site.
Their new site looks good.
And, also, don't forget to spread the money around, right? If you were going to donate $20, you could spread it between all the different BSDs that you use.
Yeah, and we have links to them all here.
Yes.
The OpenBSD donation page, NetBSD, and Dragonfly.
Yes, because the interesting thing there is, even if you don't use NetBSD or OpenBSD, if you're using FreeBSD, you're actually still using some of those, right? OpenSSH, even if you're using Linux, you're using OpenSSH, and you need to donate $5 to the OpenBSD Foundation.
Yeah.
Right?
A lot of your code's coming from these places, whether
Or,
that's the particular
interesting
distro
thing,
or
the gzip utility. Who doesn't use the gzip utility? Well, that's actually imported into FreeBSD from NetBSD.
Yep.
Or the NewFS MS-DOS, right? If you ever formatted a USB stick to be, FAT or FAT32 or something to copy files between your computers,
comes from NetBSD.
that comes from, or mtree. You might not use mtree, but every time you install or upgrade, that was all built with mtree, which came from NetBSD.
So these guys are definitely worthy causes to support. And again, a small donation doesn't have to be a lot, because if there's a lot of you guys doing it, it all adds up, and it enables these organizations to continue doing what they do, and branch out and do some new things, fun new projects, things that are experimental and that we may be able to use down the road. That'll be the next big thing in the next 10 years.
Specifically the foundations are about sponsoring the work that nobody wants to do. Right? If a developer is interested and wants to do it, they'll just do it, right? Or if, it's something that a company needs, they can pay someone to do it. But when it's something that everybody needs but nobody wants to do,
sure,
it's kind of that
tedious or ugly or boring work.
Yes, or that, it's all that kind of stuff. Then, yeah, it's great to have the foundation be able to sponsor that work and get it to happen so that it's available to everybody.
Okay. Well, cool. All right, well, moving on. So we have some more videos to discuss, and I promise we'll go through these quickly. We have the OpenZFS Dev Summit, which happened right after MeetBSD. I guess you didn't stay for that.
No, I couldn't stay that long, sadly.
I know some people they stayed for both.
Yeah, if it had been far enough apart, I could have come back maybe, but it just wasn't.
If it was immediate.
Yeah, or if it was immediately after, if it had lined up somehow, but it just didn't, sadly.
But cool. But we do have a list of videos you can watch.
Yes.
First up is Matt Aarons, who, of course, we've interviewed here before. So
actually,
you can watch
remember that one got munched.
Oh, that's right. He got munched.
No, we've had him on kind of where we recorded everything he said at Dev Summit and played that as an episode. But
correct.
Yes,
correct.
we'll have to corner him again at some point.
We'll find him. We'll find him at an upcoming conference, I'm sure. Yeah. We're coming for you, Matt.
He should be at BSD Can, and we'll just tie him up or something if we have to.
Yeah, we'll make sure the microphone's plugged in this time.
Yeah.
Whoops, sorry. Anyway, we have a recording of his opening keynote.
Yep.
So that would be fascinating to watch if you guys use ZFS at all.
But they also had the platform overview. So each of the different systems that ZFS runs on gave an overview. Sure. So OSV, Linux, Alumos, and FreeBSD. Then they had the platform panel did a Q&A, so people could ask questions of the people from all the different operating systems. Then they talked about Manta, which I forget what that is. Then talking about compression, performance, host-aware SMR, which I think is a service management or something like that. SMR is the shingled magnetic recording.
Yeah.
So that's the new.
New type of disk
Tim
technology.
Feldman from Seagate was there to talk about how new hard drives might be different and how. There's two types of shingled magnetic recording. The one is the drive does all the magic, and the operating system just thinks that it's a regular hard drive.
Sure.
But they also have host-aware SMR, where the hard drive talks to the host.
To be aware of how that works.
And so it allows ZFS to know what's going on and actually be able to,
make good decisions on where to put data and
exactly.
stuff. And that's how they're getting these larger capacity drives going forward.
Yeah, we're going to see
the 8, the 10s, the 20 gigs.
So that'll be interesting to see that. They don't have video of that one yet. I don't know if they will or not. They also talked about fast file cloning. So apparently the ability to clone an individual file rather than the whole data set, which can be very useful
Nice.
if you're doing virtual machines and such. Device removal. Everybody wants that. Being able to remove a hard drive from a RAID Z pool or something. As long as you have enough free space, it will remap the blocks that used to live on that drive to the remaining drives. Especially if you're using this, at home or on a laptop, that'll be very useful.
We have, by the way, we do have the video in our show notes for Tim Feldman's hostware SMR.
Nobody's updated the wiki on OpenZFS yet. Okay.
So maybe check our show notes instead.
Yes,
There's some extra links there. With TJ probably handed these down.
Yes, I can actually go and edit the OpenZFS wiki. I have permission.
Well, there you go. Go fix that out.
And they also talked about channel programs, which is being able to put little Lua scripts into ZFS so that you can perform a bunch of operations as a single transaction group, which is also very useful.
Nice.
Specifically, things like a recursive rollback or a bunch of other interesting things. They also had company lightning talks. Different companies that were there kind of give a little overview of what they're working on and what cool stuff they have. So DDR Drive was there. Cluster HQ, you remember we talked to Luke Marsden after EuroBSDCon last year from Malta. Matt Ahrens talked about what Delphix is doing. They had CoRaid, Storient, Cineto, Nexenta, IX Systems, and Cody Labs.
Cody, yeah.
And then they had a closing
from Matt Ahrens again.
And then day 2 was a hackathon where I think they talked a little bit about it, but they built, people actually just hacked and worked on lots of different stuff. They were talking about, they have, hackathon ideas. They were talking about doing poor man's compressed send. So normally when you do a ZFS send, it actually decompresses the file in order to send it. And then the far side decides whether or not to compress it or not. Well, if you're doing a send over the network, especially over the internet, if it was compressed, it would take less time to send.
Yeah, you might as well keep that.
So, Matt Ahrens built a working prototype, although there's still some work that needs to be done to get it to work. But during the hackathon, by having people around ask questions in real time and so on, he actually managed to get that working. They looked at implementing SHA 512 instead of just 256, but they actually John Mark Gurney and the other guy apparently decided instead to implement Blake 2, which is a different hash. And that was interesting. Also, they apparently looked at a SCSI unmap patch, which I think SCSI unmap is kind of like the trim command, but for SASTIS. But I think they were actually looking at doing that from the iSCSI, so you would actually be able to trim on a ZVol. I'm not sure. The notes here were very sparse. They looked at having the JSON command output. So
that'd be handy.
Being able to extract data. The ZFS command line stuff is already really script friendly. Like you can specify which columns you want, how you want them separated, but having that output in JSON or something would be good. I wonder if
makes a lot of these web app developments much easier.
I wonder if they're aware of libxo, the library that's is in the base of FreeBSD now, and a bunch of utilities are being updated to use it. For example, actually, the word count utility on FreeBSD head now has a -- JSON option, and it will spit out the output in JSON instead of tab delimited.
Oh, nice.
And they've started adding it to lots of other tools as well. But word count was an interesting example that someone could do in an hour or two, and is just a great example of how you can use JSON there. Like we said, file cloning with implicit indirection. So that would be making a copy of a giant file, but only keeping track of the changes. George Wilson ripped out the scrub throttle and instead did a bunch of queuings.
QMBuffs, not IOs.
Yeah.
That's mostly finished. Needs some testing.
Right. So this means that the scrub will know, instead of being limited when you're under load or whatever, it would just be queued as the lowest priority. So it'll actually be, even use less of your performance when your system is trying to do something, but won't restrict itself unnecessarily when you're not. So instead of just a dumb rate limit, it'll actually be in a queue, which is quite good.
Cool.
Apparently people are working on improving the ZFS help command. Currently, that really is kind of a mess. Apparently they actually completed converting the ZFS man page into one man page per sub command. I was actually going to look at doing that, so I'm glad someone else did it, and I can just port it to FreeBSD. Lots of continued work from last year's hackathon, getting ZFS on Linux to compile with newer stuff, storage pool aging. specify histogram of free segment size. Lots of interesting stuff there.
Get next file syscall. That's interesting.
Right, it'll actually allow you to
prefetch stuff.
Yeah, iterate over the objects rather than having to do it the way you'd normally do it in the file system. Specifically, you could provide a huge speed up for operations that need to touch every file, like a chmod -r. They had a porting party. Learn how to contribute changes to a new platform. So, teach the guys from Linux how to contribute to FreeBSD, and the guys from FreeBSD how to contribute to Lumos, and so on. Upstreaming a bunch of changes. Apparently, a company has some tools for building ZFS, and they got that upstreamed. More performance analytic framework for recording performance, store and display, dtrace, graphs, all that fun stuff. A framework for the use method data collection with Brendan Gregg, who we'll talk about in a minute. Lots of different stuff. Lumos Grub 2. Someone's actually working on getting a Lumos to be able to boot from Grub.
I'm actually looking at that right now. That looks interesting. I'm, of course, very interested.
Yes, that might actually solve a problem of how do you boot a Lumos in Beehive. If they get it to be able to start with Grub, that'll at least be a step forward in getting it to boot in Beehive as well.
Yeah, correct.
Using Grub 2 to boot Linux from a root pool with multiple VDEVs. Something you've been doing for a while.
We've been doing this for a while now.
Linux might catch up too. Clean up the embedded ZIL code. How to deal with data sets that have UTF-8 characters in them, or pool names with UTF-8 characters in them. Update the VDEV K-stats, which is several new per data set ZIL K-stats. That'll be awesome. Being able to have stats per data set instead of just for the whole pool.
Nice.
You can actually figure out, which data set is having all your different usage and so on. Apparently somebody was actually writing Collecti agents, which is a stats gathering platform. A better progress reporting for scrubs and resilvers. How to promote prefetch reads to be synchronous. Object count per user in DMU. That's interesting.
Makes ZFS receive a little less trusting.
Yes, so that
some security.
Somebody can't inject or accidentally even injecting corrupt stuff can't make it cause a problem. Arc KMM Reap, which is, I'm guessing, how you get the Arc to give up memory. As well, this improves the amount of memory consumed by having the Arc buff headers when you're using an L2 Arc. So currently, when you use an L2 Arc, it actually ends up using more RAM because you have to keep a note in the Arc saying this file's in the L2 Arc. Well, you only have an L2 Arc because you don't have enough RAM. Sure. So being able to use less of that will actually help a lot.
Quickly creating fully fragmented pools. That's interesting.
Right.
That'll make it interesting for testing and performance and stuff.
Currently, the only way to create a fragmented pool is to use a pool for a year, and then it'll be nice and fragmented. Well, they grab the fragment or the space maps from a bunch of those, and then they can just create a new pool and apply that space map and make the pool think it's that full, so they can see how it performs under laboratory type environment with that amount of fragmentation, so they can tweak the algorithms. Also,
I like this one. RAID Z1 for a single device.
Right.
I like it. So you can probably expand it later by adding more disks and turn it into a full RAID Z.
I think it's more basically just kind of like copies equals 2, but with stronger guarantees. Okay. So to just storing the checksum data in the second place on the drive, and that way you'll have... Because currently RAID Z VDEVs cannot be modified after creation.
Okay. Well, that's cool.
But yeah, that is interesting. More static analysis of the tools for ZFS, and lots and lots and lots and lots of other stuff.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff they discussed here. And some of these we got to mention too are just ideas, not necessarily.
A lot of these were actually just ideas people had for the hackathon, and then the ones with sub-list elements under them are things people actually worked on. But also they talked about per zone I/O, quality of service stuff, how to reconstruct a space map if yours gets trashed somehow. Because I think Josh told us about an instance where that had happened.
They said Albert has this nearly working, so that's cool.
Open ZFS infrastructure in Docker called Flocker.
Okay, because why not?
Some people were fixing open bugs. If you suspend a pool, make the zpool command not just hang waiting for the pool to be unsuspended before it does anything. And they added ZIL test and ZFS test tools.
Nice.
Very useful.
Okay. Well, definitely. Lots of good stuff that happened at the OpenZFS conference, and I hope they do more of these in the future. They sound really neat.
They seem to have one every year, but it'd be good to see a miniature version of this happen at maybe BSDCan or something as well.
Yeah, that would be cool.
We had a Birds of a Feather session, but maybe something a little bigger, even during the Dev Summit days or something.
Okay. Well, next up in the quick headlines this week, so our friend Will Bachman has been doing some BSD interviews for a long time now.
Yes, and so he managed to get one we haven't managed to get.
Yeah, he did manage to get an interview with Matthew Dillon, the lead developer of Dragonfly BSD. So we're jealous, Will.
Yes, when did he do this? Because as far as I know, Will normally gets these interviews at conferences. Well, what conference did you go to? Because we've been to like everyone we could find, and we couldn't find Matthew Dillon.
Well, we're going to find Matthew eventually.
Oh, yes, we will hunt him down.
In the meantime, if you guys want to hear Matthew talk about Dragonfly, you'll definitely want to go give this one a listen.
Yes,
so we'll
nice
have the
long
link here to, we'll have the link to BSD Talk where you can hear the interview.
248.
Nice. So they discuss a lot of the big changes coming in Dragonfly's upcoming 4.0 release. So some exciting stuff. Okay, speaking of videos, we've had a lot of these, but also MeetBSD videos now looks like are starting to appear online as well.
Exactly.
And some of the quick headlines here, we have Kirk McCusick's Narrative History of BSD, Jordan Hubbard's FreeBSD the Next 10 Years, which is the one we were messing from Euro.
Yep.
So you can watch that. It's a little more updated version. Brendan Gregg on performance analysis, which we got an interview with him,
yes,
so
but
watch for that.
You should watch the video. His talk is amazing. And
it's really good. It'll set the context for the interview we do later,
yes,
too.
And we will be, that interview is so good, we'll be doing it next week ahead of schedule.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, you guys will want to stay tuned for that next week then. A little tease, but fascinating interview. That's a great one for the holiday week with Thanksgiving.
Yes, and also the slides for most people's talks are now up on the MeetBSD page. So even the ones that the videos aren't up yet, like my little one about using UCL and everything. And
sure.
But everything they have the slides for are now up on the agenda as well.
Cool. Okay, yeah. So stay tuned next week. Should be exciting.
Yeah, and there should be more videos coming up for MeetBSD. Hopefully, David Maxwell's one about pipe cut. Because
that was fascinating.
That's one where you have to see to understand how awesome that is.
Yeah, I didn't really get it for like the first 3 minutes, and then he started doing stuff.
And I was like,
why do I have this on my laptop right now?
Exactly.
But we got an interview with him as well. So
yes, that'll be coming up in the
hear some more about that here in the near future.
And the best part was they had a session about that we mentioned earlier about the FreeNAS. And so you can see here where Kirk has just pulled a hard drive out of FreeNAS, and he has now put it on the floor and is smashing it with a hammer, and it's running away, and he's chasing it down and smashing it some more with a hammer.
It was running ZFS too, so no UFS was harmed.
Exactly.
In the smashing of this drive.
Yes. Somebody tweeted a picture of that, and somebody's first comment was, Kirk tries out hammer FS.
Wah, wah, wah.
But also, yes, Kirk was, he's like, I've always wanted to do that. And I thought that was great.
Well, very cool. Well, it looks like we have some exciting stuff coming up here in the next couple of weeks, too. So you'll have to keep it tuned right here. Okay, it's time for feedback from you guys out in the audience. And first up this week, we have Dominic asking about UEFI and ZFS. He said, hey guys, I'm using an encrypted ZFS, so I need to enter my password at boot time. Is it possible to change this key map yet? I don't know if you can do that yet.
Yeah, if you're using like a German keyboard or something where your keys are in different places. Or and how do you enter the right password?
Correct.
But this happens
I assume he's talking about at the FreeBSD prompt. I'm not sure.
Right, this would happen so early. It's before you've read rc.conf or something because... Well, your rc.conf is probably on this encrypted ZFS.
Yeah, so it hasn't loaded the key map yet, unless you can do it in the loader somehow.
If you're using the new VT stuff, you might be able to set the key map via the loader. Yeah, this is a very specific question that I have no answer for. I luckily have a standard keyboard and don't have this problem.
Yes. Well, maybe somebody in the audience would know.
This is one you might want to send specifically to one of the mailing lists, like just FreeBSD-current, And hopefully Ed Mast will see it and be like, I know how to solve this problem. Or one of the Russian people that is working on the VT stuff will be like, this is how you do it, because I have a Russian keyboard and have the same problem.
We do the same thing. Yeah, I'm sure there's got to be a workaround somehow, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Since we don't obviously have to use it for our keyboards, it's not been a big deal. But he says, as far as I understand, there's an AT and USB driver for handling keyboards. When I tried setting the key map for the USB driver in my custom kernel config, it leads to a failed build. So he said he reported this to the current mailing list, but is there some other way to change it early? He doesn't see it. So he asks how we do it in PCBSD. So, Grub does the prompting on our end. And to be honest, I'm not sure if Grub changes the key map
I would imagine
how
it
that works.
doesn't.
If it does, it would pass it through to the kernel. So that would be maybe a way around it, but
it passes the password through, not the keyboard setting.
Yeah, the password. Yeah. Not the key map settings, but the password. Right. So if Grub accepts the password with the right key map, then the string should get passed through. That'd be an interesting thing to test. Maybe if you have a VM, throw that in and see if that works. He said it's not a big thing for me to enter the passphrase with an English layout since he knows how to type it, but that's more of a workaround than a nice solution, which I agree.
Yes.
There should be.
But I would pose this specific question of how do I change the key map for entering my Geli password to the FreeBSD current mailing list.
See if there's some other folks who've already tackled this and know the magic incantation you have to do to make this work.
Or we'll build the magic incantation if it's not there.
Yeah. So his next question, he said, is regarding encrypted ZFS. Is it possible to change the passphrase later or have multiple passphrases for the same pool? And is it possible to remove an older passphrase that you don't want to work anymore?
I think there's a way to, it depends.
Talking Jelly
right, yeah. So on Jelly, you can't change the key because all the data on the drive is encrypted with a key. However, the passphrase is what's used to encrypt the key, which is then used to encrypt the data. So I'm quite sure you can change the passphrase.
Yeah, I believe
check the Geli man page. I don't know how to do it off the top of my head. Also, Michael Luke is writing a book, and I bet the answer's in there. The other one, he asked about multiple passwords. You can have multiple passwords. You can do a different password for each disk, and if it's ZFS, you need at least X of the disk to be able to import.
Sure.
Although I think I'm 90% sure Geli does support having multiple keys. So you can actually have multiple passwords, any one of which will unlock the drive. And that's so that you can have, if you have a company laptop, the global administrator can have a password and the user can have a password.
Well, yeah, it says in the man page here, Jelly definitely allows the use of independent user keys. Yeah. In other words, like your user key, then the company master key, et cetera. So it does the multiple keys. So I would assume this is doable.
So with that, I imagine you can add and remove keys as well.
Yeah.
So
the man page will know all.
So yes to all. And then his last question was about UEFI boot. Well, unless you're using PCBSD, it's currently not possible to boot a root on ZFS, even unencrypted, with UEFI, partly because of the way they had to do stuff. So your loader.conf and all the settings like that have to be read early enough. So
from an unencrypted partition.
Right. The two options they had for this were having loader.conf live in the FAT32 per EFI partition, except for nobody using FreeBSD is expecting that. So they didn't want to do that.
It is weird. I admit.
So in the EFI binary that they do put in there, they have a little bit of code that looks through every drive until it finds the very first UFS partition it finds, and it boots off that. So that can cause really weird things. You install off a USB stick and it's still connected, and it boots off the USB stick next time instead. Or it was really weird on my laptop. If I told it to boot off the USB stick, it would actually find the UFS partition on the hard drive first. If I told it to boot off the hard drive, it would actually find the UFS partition on the USB stick first. So whatever I told the BIOS to boot, it would boot the opposite because of the way the EFI or the little FreeBSD code worked. But that's just a stopgap until they can come up with something better.
Yeah. Well, he asks, how do I provide useful information from early booting stages in case the loader loads, but then it comes to loading the kernel, it fails? He says, obviously, there's no more output, just a frozen system. How do you debug at that early stage with a common mainboard? Is there serial USB or some other debugging possible?
Again, that's a question for Ed Mast and the other people working on
best for the mailing
EFI.
list for the guys who wrote that. I'm sure they have some way of doing the debugging on it, but not something I've played with.
Yeah. I pointed them at some interesting stuff I found. Somebody had built a system to be able to recompile grub modules like the ZFS and UFS code as EFI binaries so they could be loaded as drivers. Although the way they were doing it was GPLv3, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Next question.
Well, moving on. Steven has a question about Chromebooks.
Ooh.
He said, in a recent show, Alan mentioned someone was working on support for the Acer C720. I have scoured the lists and forums, but unable to find any recent activity. I have it installed current on it on 10/25, so October 25th. He said, what's the word on these patches? Everything seems to work except for the keyboard and touchpad. Keyboard doesn't even work in the console or X11. Have to plug in an external keyboard to even log in from the text console. Just curious. Thanks. I'm trying to. I know it's been some work on it. I'm trying to find wiki.
The guy's name is
Michael Gremlin.
Yeah, but also Ruslan something. He gave Ruslan Bukin. He did some work on it. Here's the wiki page. It's FreeBSD/ARM/Chromebook.
Okay.
Here, I'll add the link to the show notes. And I also dropped it in the chat room if anybody's watching live and wants to take a look.
Well, there you go. When was the last time that wiki page was updated?
I have no idea.
November 8th, so last week.
There you go.
A little more than a week ago. So it's not
so it has
too old.
instructions on checking out head, creating the USB image, creating an SD card, entering developer mode, installing it.
Enabling boot.
So these are the Chromebook 2, the ARM-based one. It does support the
He's
keyboard,
asking
though.
about the Acer specifically.
Right. If he has the Acer one, that's just a regular x86, and I don't know why that might not be working.
Well, I remember Michael was showing me like there's some stuff going on where he got the touch screen to work.
Okay. That's a different one than I was thinking about. The one I was mentioning, I might have got the model numbers confused because they're not very clear. I was talking about the one with the ARM v7 Cortex A15 chip, the Samsung Xenos or whatever, where they have the frame buffer, which is the video card, the keyboard, and USB 2 and 3 working.
I'm not seeing a wiki page for the Acer though, specifically. So
I think the left shift doesn't work or something, and the Wi-Fi sound and power management are poor.
Interesting.
So far.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on then. We don't really have a good answer for that one just yet.
Yeah. So the one I was talking about was different, although I think there's, like Chris said, maybe look for stuff from, I guess, which mailing list did he look on? It would probably be on, like, FreeBSD Arch for architectures.
Arch or hackers, maybe?
ARM, or, well, not ARM, because it's that one, yeah. You might just email Michael directly and be like, hey, what's up?
Yeah, where is that? How's
Just
that going?
don't everybody do that.
Yes,
Then
yes.
Michael will hunt us down.
Okay, well, I'll let you read the next one from Florian.
So Florian asks about using webs and databases for jails. So in regard to the listener asking about using a jail database server only reachable from from a jailed web server, he said you can also do an additional loopback device. So you can create an LO1 instead of an LO0 and put your IPs on that because by default you won't have a 127.0.0.1 inside a jail. It purposely gets mapped to the jail's primary IP address. He says, while we're on the topic of web servers, he had an idea for a redundant set of jailed web servers on hosts sharing one IP with CARP and then load balancing the web stuff via RelayD or PF. He says, with more hosts, one could even use several CARP groups and IPs and DNS-based round robin to spread load on PF across several hosts. Says, one of you ever built such a setup? I've done something kind of similar. I used Nginx instead of RelayD because RelayD wasn't a thing back when I built this. But yeah, I had a jail on each of 8 hosts that would actually execute the code, and then there was the front-end load balancer that would spread the load between those. But I just did it with the equivalent of RelayD. I didn't use any PF to do it.
Sure.
He says or load balancing NAT over several external IPs with CARP and PF. I think he means internal there, but yeah. So you can have PF do with his redirect rules or whatever, split the traffic coming in. So when traffic comes in on port 80 on this one address, you can then route that by splitting the traffic up between 3 backend hosts. That can work. Although in that case, PF isn't doing any checking that host exists or that host is up. So if one of the 3 is down, 1 out of every 3 people that tries to visit it will get an error. So then using CARP to have between 2 or more CARP IPs would solve that. Because the way you could do it is, if you have 5 hosts or something, you could create 2 or 3 CARP groups over that with some overlap, so that way, if any 2 of your 5 hosts go down, there's still 1 in each of the 2 CARP groups, at least 1 up in each of the 2 CARP groups, and then you never have any down that way. Or just by using the demotion and stuff, I think you technically could have all 5 in both CARP groups, but then that kind of defeats the purpose of having 2 CARP groups. Except, you could have them in staggered order, right? Like if a box is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, in CARP group 1, host 1 is the most important and host 2 is the second most, etc. And in CARP group 2, do it from the other end. So then it's actually your middle server that would be the least loaded under that circumstance. So yeah, it's interesting to look at some of the different things depending on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it and what the application is and what the protocol is and so on. But yes, there are lots of interesting ways to combine, RelayD or some other reverse proxy, CARP, PF, jails, vimage, all that fun stuff.
Okay. So I guess, of course, that's cool. He says that it's totally Peter Hanstein's fault after reading the book of PF. So
yes,
very cool.
That is the thing. Whenever you learn about a new tool, you want to immediately use it to solve all the problems.
Yep.
Which is the great thing about BSD is there's all kinds of tools like that.
Okay. Well, moving on here. Richard has a question about FreeNAS and packages. He says, only 2 machines remain on in my house 24/7. First up is his Linux desktop, only to keep IRC sessions open under screen, and then his FreeNAS 9.2.1.6 server. He said he would like to move IRC over to his FreeNAS instead, so he can probably power down the Linux system.
Yep.
So he gives us his specs for his FreeNAS box. Looks reasonable, an i3, dual core, etc., etc. That's not going to be an issue running IRC, I would imagine. He says, I've installed FreeNAS plugins, and he lists some of them here, Headphones, Slickbird, Plex. He says, Google has plenty on running IRC under FreeBSD, but I'm not sure if that applies to FreeNAS. I assume whatever method is used for installing IRC, I can use to install screen. He said, is it safe to just follow the generic FreeBSD guides with FreeNAS? So in this case,
really.
Well, yes and no. If you're doing this on FreeNAS and there's not a plugin for it, FreeNAS can make jails.
Right.
So you would just make a jail and then follow the steps as you would on a FreeBSD box, package, install.
Yeah. Once you create the jail, you can follow the FreeBSD instructions. By default, the host FreeNAS system is mostly read-only and nothing will work.
Yeah. So you wouldn't do this on the host, but yeah, you just make a jail, give it the IP address you want to use for IRC, and then go ahead and log into that jail via either the FreeNAS console or if you turn on SSH in it, you can SSH into it. Yep. And then go ahead and set up screen and IRC and do your thing that way.
So you can just create jails on the FreeNAS via the web GUI, or?
I believe so, yeah.
But somehow create a jail in the FreeNAS, and then once you're inside the jail in FreeNAS, it's just a FreeBSD system, and you can follow your regular instructions.
Yep. So there you go. And then it should just work, and you can set up, rc.conf entries and all that to start everything automatically.
Yeah. The biggest one people run into is the base system in a FreeNAS is mostly read-only, and some of the parts that aren't get overwritten from a snapshot every time you reboot, and so then your stuff goes away.
They have a database of config that then splats stuff out on the disk, when it boots up. And it's kind of nano BSD under the hood too, so it doesn't have everything you'd expect.
Yeah, a lot of the tools are missing and stuff. But if you get a jail, that's a full FreeBSD system in the jail.
Yeah, then you're good. Yep. Then you're good. So yeah, that would be what I would do, and that'll allow you to power down that Linux desktop, especially if you're just using it to keep IRC open. I mean, come on.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big waste. It's like, have you heard of Quasel?
Yeah, that's a waste of power for a really tiny utility.
Yes. Somebody should build a Quasel Core plugin for FreeNAS. That'd be a good one to have.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I love Quasel.
So do I. All right, so next question from Kevin about shells. He says, 5 file this one under idle curiosity, but he says, I've been trying to figure out what the reasoning is behind FreeBSD's selection of default shells. When you do a fresh install of FreeBSD, the root user gets assigned the shell CSH. Creating any other user by default will actually create them with the shell binsh. Why the difference? Well, especially going back, like when this was decided, up until fairly recently, the binsh didn't really do the arrow keys by default, and CSH did. Sure. And there was that, and a couple other things. I don't know what the exact reasoning for why root is CSH. The reason why a new user is by default binsh is just, you might expect, the default is the most reasonable, the default is to do something that will always be there, or something that people wouldn't be confused by. If you get CSH when you're expecting bash or sh, you'll be very confused when, you can't do a for loop the same way and a bunch of other things. So that's probably why it's the default for everybody but root. This kind of a question probably goes back so far, we'd have to ask a very small number of very specific people to know the answer.
Dig up the historical reasons why this was chosen.
So one might argue that root has a special shell for use of system management tasks. I think it was mostly just that CSH had more history type stuff than the default SH did, although that's actually improved recently. So he says, but wouldn't the standard Bourne shell be a better choice for that? Well, most times you're not, writing a script at the prompt. You're doing it in a script. So,
I use CSH. That's my preferred shell when I'm doing my work day to day. But when I script, everyth's in Bourne shell.
Exactly.
So.
He says, I could understand the reverse being defaults users get CSH or TCSH, and the root has SH as their dull, predictable shell. I can understand that as well. He says, considering that almost all system scripts use binsh, which makes sense because C shell is,
weird.
If you're writing your shell scripts in C, why are they not just in C? Comments in the make.conf example file sum up in an amusing way the standard applied to make files. 3 shells are supported: sh, ksh, and csh. Using sh is most common and advised. Using ksh might work, but it's not guaranteed. Using csh would be absurd. And yes, that in a shell script, that makes sense. From a user's perspective, CSH works good. I started with TCSH because it was the default on my first shell account, I think. And then I bought this book for school called BSD Hacks because it was the textbook for my Unix admin class. And it taught me all these tricks you could do with TCSH, like automatic typo correction and stuff. And
so you kept using it.
And I fell in love with it. And now I've been using it for 20 years and I couldn't stop if I wanted.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. It's like just I have muscle memory.
Yes.
In my fingers.
I know
just how the show works.
A lot of FreeBSD developers use ZSH now, and they have like macros. So like when you do ZFS space, when you hit tab, it can tab complete
commands,
all the sub commands of ZFS. So it actually you can do. There's one for package. So when you install the package, it has the optional feature of installing the ZSH completions. So you would do package in tab, and it would finish the word install for you. Which I can see being very useful, although I type that so fast out of muscle memory now that I've never needed the tab complete for it.
Yeah, the commands aren't that long and difficult.
Tab complete for me is usually in the case of a file where I don't actually know the exact name or capitalization of it. If I know it, I can probably type it almost as fast as I can tab complete it. Not quite, but anyway. He says, it gets more confusing to him anyway when we consider that root will even be dropped to binsh if you go to single user mode. So why CSH in multi-user mode? It's easy enough to switch shells, of course. He's just curious why the default is.
Yeah, like you said, that's
if I had to randomly guess,
somebody was there.
Yes, you'd have to ask somebody who was there. But if I had to randomly guess, I would say it was because the guy who started BSD wrote CSH, and that's what he wanted his shell to be. And so that's what the shell for root was from the beginning, and nobody felt like changing it.
And it would be a major bike shed to do so.
Yes. And it would just, all of a sudden, stuff I used to type at the command line as root doesn't work anymore. That's absurd.
Yeah.
So while it's strange, and I understand people's confusion. The answer might be that in 1970 something, Bill Joy wrote CSH and decided he liked it. You know, and you know, when you write something, you tend to be slightly partial to it.
Yeah. And hey, if you write the stuff, you get to pick too.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how it works.
And if it's been that way, you know, it's a little harder to change it.
Cool.
Until, you know, CSH is definitely better interactive than SH for some things. So I can understand there not being a very compelling case to change the shell to Born. But yes, never write shell scripts in CSH.
Okay, well, we're going to move right into our mailing list gold section for the
Yes.
week. And we have some less funny but more informative mailing list posts this week, which are good. So the first one comes from, looks like OpenBSD here. And somebody writes in about contributing. Jeremy writes in asking, I very much believe OpenBSD is important and needs support, but I'm not a programmer and I don't have money to donate. What other ways are there to contribute? I remember the website used to list ways to contribute in various ways, but I only seem to find monetary donations on the website now. Could somebody steer me in the right direction? And this actually spawned a whole thread of a lot of really helpful stuff.
Yes, and I'm sure they have lots of ideas. You know, they say if you're fluent in 2 or more languages, you can translate stuff. You can do bug hunting. You can answer people's questions on the mailing list because maybe that'll make that person become a user and maybe they will learn to be a programmer or will contribute or something. There are lots of ways. So yeah, writing documentation, editing it, translating, helping people answering questions for people, helping find and sort bugs. You know, in the FreeBSD, we have a Bugzilla. People can send stuff in, you know. If you notice there's one and they haven't provided quite enough detail, you can ask the follow-up questions so that when a developer does get around to looking at it, all the information's already there.
That
sorting
one I
and
would say is so invaluable.
Yeah.
By the way, because I get asked this from PCBSD all the time too. Like, how can I help? I don't know how to code. And it's like bugs, man. If you can help people just get proper info in their bug reports, so that when a developer does have a chance to look at it, it's like, oh, I know what the problem is. I can fix it now instead of waiting days to get responses and. Like, that is a huge deal.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trample on that, but my 2 cents.
Exactly, for sure. And, you know, there's the forums. You can help answer questions if you don't like mailing lists or whatever. There's lots of ways to help out. What else did they come up with here? He says translation, except for he only speaks English. Well, you know, that sometimes the person who wrote the documentation, English was a second language, and it could use some editing or whatever.
Well, people mention man pages too. If you read it and it's not clear to you and you think it could use extra stuff, writing examples for man pages, like this is how you would do this, this, and this. I can't tell you how helpful that is when I look at a man page and he already has the examples at the bottom. Like, okay, in the real world, this is how you use this. And they show you how to do something useful right out of the box.
Or
those things
here, Ingo Swarzy, who happens to be the guy that likes to write the tools for writing man pages, says that, you know, you don't have to be a programmer to write man pages. For some types of man pages, it definitely helps. But, you know, even just if you like researching and stuff, there's a history section at the bottom of each man page, and a lot of the stuff is missing. You know, even if you just want to go through and, you know, research and find some of that stuff to put it in there. Or, you know, somebody wrote a Perl script. Obviously, if you're not a programmer, that might, but I think the output of it is in a bug with like a 5-digit number, which means a really old bug in FreeBSD. So I think the tool's still there to find man pages that cross-reference another man page, and that man page doesn't exist. So either that cross-reference needs to be removed or the target man page needs to be created. You know, and just things like that. You know, wasn't a programmer, and then I really wanted to do something, so I kind of started by brute force playing with C just to do it anyway. Apparently there's also openbsdsupport.org, which they're trying to help answer questions. So you can obviously help write guides and how-tos and blog articles and stuff and just promote your very favorite BSD. That helps. You know, and obviously there's lots of more stuff talked about in this whole thread, you know.
Sure. So yeah, definitely a lot of ways you can get involved, and this was a good question he asked, and I'm glad he didn't just get ignored.
Yes, I actually see here
with legitimate. things.
Somebody specifically says, there are some people who don't speak C who've contributed excellent material. For example, Michael W. Lucas self-describes himself as a non-C programmer, so he can write shell scripts and Perl, but not C. Absolute BSD is a great resource, but also, in both OpenBSD and FreeBSD, there are huge parts of the code base that aren't written in C, but are written in shell script. And if you can write shell script, some of those could use some love.
Sure.
That's how I got into helping rewrite the FreeBSD installer was, hey, it's in shell script, not C. I can do that.
Yeah. I know how to hack on that.
Yeah. But, it could be as easy as going to your local Linux users group and giving the little BSD talk or, there's lots of different
being
things.
available to answer questions.
Yes, or,
questions.
doing the triage on bugs and asking questions and, there's lots of stuff.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on to the next one here. Looks like the OpenSSH mailing list from Felipe.
Yes.
And you want to go ahead and read through this one? I'll do the last one.
Yes, can compression safely be used on SSH? So he says, at work, we collect logs via SSH from all kinds of hosts on one of the central nodes that no connection to the internet and is tried to keep secure. The idea is, as you can imagine, that in the case of a compromise, we'd at least have the logs up to some point without any forgeries. The logging is done continuously and compression is used. Now, the following is not really that much relevant to our scenario, but he asks about the crime and beast attacks, which are reasons why compression is disabled in TLS or SSL. And he's asking, does the same thing apply to SSH? And there's a whole discussion thread that goes on here. It'll depend on a couple of things. I think the compression is done slightly differently, but I'm pretty sure the crime attack relies on being able to get the same web page as you and then comparing it with and without the compression or something. So obviously with SSH, that's probably not going to be as true. Although I'm not 100% sure. I don't recall exactly how the crime attack worked because I read the paper like a year and a half ago or whenever that was.
Sure.
But he asks a bunch of questions and they get answered on the mailing list here.
And in quite a lot of detail,
Yes.
I might add. There's a lot in here.
Specifically say, these attacks apply to an adversary that can monitor your traffic and your mixed secret data with public data injected or at least observed by the attacker. This results in a compression oracle. The size of the compressed packet can be used to infer matches between secret and public data and thus leak secret information. And since, over SSH, that's less likely than SSL, right? So SSL, they can compare the page they would get from PayPal to the page you would get. And by messing with it during a man-in-the-middle attack, be able to figure stuff out. Whereas with SSH, that's a lot less likely because, they don't have root on your box to access the log file or whatever.
Sure.
It does raise the question, are your log files not compressed before you transfer them?
That's true.
It's
Depends on if he's transferring like the active log file and just not compressing them beforehand or like historical stuff.
So they asked the question, are your logging connections actually carrying any secrets? So is it the content of the log files that has to be secret, or are you just worried about the general SSH being compromised or something?
Still a fascinating thread to read through if you're interested in security at all in SSH. This is something you may want to take a look at.
Yeah. But yes, if you've ever wondered how that works, you should take a look. And they have a nice long thread here with all that fun stuff.
So lastly, we have an interesting post here also to the OpenBSD mailing lists about making Firefox less insecure, which this is actually fascinating. He goes through a lot of different ways of possible exploits of Firefox and what that could look like, what that could do to your box. And then he goes through a bunch of scenarios on how you would try and reduce the risk of that happening, the exploit mitigation. And that generated quite a bit of posts as well, including some people suggesting different methods of preventing a web browser from causing damage after being exploited. So I'm not sure if there was any notables you wanted to point out on this one, Alan, but I know he talked about like running things in jails.
Yeah, running it in a jail using Capsicum, which, the whole reason Google wants Capsicum ported to Linux, I think, is actually for running Capsicum on the Chrome browser.
Yeah, definitely. And he talks about like using different extensions to block like JavaScript and having Firefox go through an SSH tunnel. localhost, maybe running it as an unprivileged user.
Yeah, so
And then,
I can see definitely running Firefox as a different user than yours, so that if it's compromised, it has access to the files the web browser has, but not the files you have. Yep.
Yeah, there's definitely some different ways you can do this, which will provide some protection, assuming that your browser has been compromised at this point. Disabling all plugins, of course.
Using the NoScript plugin to stop JavaScript from executing, things like that. In general, if you don't have Java or Flash, most of the vulnerabilities are already not going to hit you. So there's that.
True.
Like PCBSD already has the ability to run an app in a jail on X, right? Like your X jail.
Yeah, we have a warden can create jails and have access to X. Like we can export that so X apps
So you could run your Firefox in a jail that way. Or any other app you care to do.
Yeah, anything you feel like throwing in the jail. Of course, the downside is if you run it, you lose some of the convenience, right? If you don't have access to your home directory where you keep stuff, it's a little harder to share files. And
if you download something in Firefox, the file will end up in your jail, and you have to go and fish it out.
And it's like, oh, where did that go? Now I got to load up a root user to copy that over or whatever. So, yeah. So, I mean, there's some downsides to it. It's probably why people don't do this everywhere and why it's not on by default that way. But definitely if security is a prime concern, this is something you'll want to consider doing. Okay, well, that actually wraps up all the mailing list gold for the week as well. And of course, we have links to the original posts. So if you want to go read through all the threads on these and all the replies, you are welcome to do so after the show. And of course, as we close, we want to mention that all of our tutorials are going to be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv. And as usual, you can send your questions, comments, show ideas, or topics, or stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv. And we would welcome getting those from you guys. We enjoy getting comments, questions, and throwing those into future episodes. Also, if you've worked on any cool BSD-related projects, write about it. Send it in.
Yes.
We'd love to feature more community content on things that you guys are doing. Maybe ways you use BSD in your workplace, projects you build with BSD, things you're working on in BSD at the moment. Maybe we can do an interview. That would be fantastic as well.
Yeah, so whether or not you're a BSD developer, if you're doing something that involves BSD, let us know. We'd love to just even mention it on the show. Hey, look, somebody's doing something cool. Or, we can have an interview and actually talk to you in depth about it.
Sure. And of course, you can always watch us live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern or 1900 UTC. And we'd love to have you with us. And we can hopefully chat with you a little on IRC at the time.
I think one of the people that wrote in with the question about the Chromebook actually posted some stuff on IRC, said he found commit over at Dragonfly BSD. And he thinks that the commit describes what the problem is on... it says the original FreeBSD code disables and enables a keyboard port all the time and even sends discrete disable commands instead of just trusting that the command register flags will do the job. And then it describes the change they use to solve the problem. And so it might literally just be a matter of backporting this patch back to FreeBSD, and it will solve the problem with the keyboard on the that particular x86 version of the Chromebook, the C720.
See, that's the kind of stuff you get if you're watching live and hanging out in the chat room with us too, by the way. So try and do that if you're available, and especially if you're in the right time zones where that makes sense for you.
Right. It says here specifically, Chromebooks appear to be using a BIOS emulator for the i8042, which gets really unhappy if the keyboard port is disabled even temporarily. And so they have a patch here that it's entirely possible this patch will apply cleanly against FreeBSD even. So that might be a solution.
Cool.
I'll throw that in the show notes as well so we don't lose that.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us this week on the show, and we look forward to having you with us next week and in all of our future episodes. And don't forget the tease. We got some great interviews coming up in the upcoming week.
Yes,
so
I think
stick around.
Next week is Brendan Gregg about benchmarking, and you have to see that one.
You have to see it. That was a fantastic interview. So, look forward to that. We had a lot of fun recording that. So, cool. Okay, well, thanks, guys. We'll see you same time next week. You guys have a safe weekend. Keep on BSDing.